I do almost all of my recording using DAW-less gear, usually gear with a limited number of tracks, like this Tascam 424 or the 8-track digital Portastudio that I featured in other videos. The reason why I like using that equipment is because it forces you to perform bounces. If you work in a DAW and aren't familiar with this kind of gear, bouncing is just mixing a subset of the elements that you've recorded into what is essentially a tiny piece of your final mix, because once you've mixed it, you don't mess with it. I like that because it keeps my sort of like overall decision-making load, my juggle factor at a minimum, and that's something that makes the recording process really pleasant for me. At the end of my last recording update, I performed a bounce of 4 tracks on this 424 and thought, I'm not gonna mess with that anymore. I'm gonna move on to further recording. And then I changed my mind. Boo. I have 3 instruments recorded on these 4 tracks. I've got 2 tracks of acoustic guitar, but they're the same performance, just different mics. I've got a track of vocals and a track of what is supposed to sound like a kick drum, but it's just a cajon. My idea with this is to create a core around which the rest of the song can be recorded. And I expected that core to include a lead vocal track. I think it sounds great in the context of this extraordinarily sparse arrangement. But when I've recorded some like additional keyboards or guitars, I'm worried that it's kind of going to disappear or sound boring. I'm afraid of that because it has happened before. In fact, I think it kind of happened in the last recording project that I did. And so I thought, well, maybe this is something that I could try to do better this time. And then last night I really rewatched the interview that Rick Beato conducted with Butch Vig, who produced some of my all-time favorite rock records. And I really fixated on one thing that he said about recording Billy Corgan's vocals.
That was like the micro pitch shift. On the left side maybe up 5 or 6 or 7 cents, and the left side go down 5 or 6 or 7 cents.
It's Future Jordan here to clarify something about what Butch is talking about here. He uses the term pitch shift, and I think many people, especially if you play guitar, probably associate that with a very specific type of gear. But when he talks about like adjusting the sound by a few cents on either side, I think what he's talking about, I'm 99% sure, that he's talking about an effect that is usually, I think, called a harmonizer or sometimes a detune effect. This effect does involve shifting pitch, but it's less like a pitchfork or pog than it is like a chorus type effect, because it usually involves taking a dry signal and splitting it, and then taking one or even both sides of that split signal and adjusting the pitch, so that then when they're blended back together, you get something that's sort of like a chorus sound, except it's not wobbly.
Now, it's not very loud. It's just mixed in enough just to give a little bit of extra presence and to widen his voice a lot. You can probably hear it more if you put headphones on.
That is exactly the kind of thing that I was hoping I could accomplish, and so I came out into the shed to do some experimentation. I teed up one section of the track where the vocal and all the other instruments are present so I could get a sense of what things would sound like in a mix, and then using one of the effect sends on this device, I ran vocal signal through 3 different guitar pedals, 3 different effects, and one combination of 2 effects. The first piece of gear that I used was a Boss PS-6 Harmonist. Because it has a detune setting, I found the exact setting that is most similar to what Vig described in the video, just a few cents in either direction in the stereo spectrum. And then I've got, I removed all the dry signal from the mix that's exiting this pedal. That's the first effect that I tried. Somebody wake me, 'cause I'm too deep in orphan promises and loading screens. The second was a very, very short and dark delay, which was executed with a JHS Lucky Cat. The time is as low as it can go. The mix is all the way on the delay side, so there's no dry signal left. I made the sound as dark as possible because in trial and error, the delay is much more obvious and sounds more like a classic, like 50s slapback when it's a brighter sound. So I made it as dark as I could, very few repeats. Somebody wake me, 'cause I'm too deep in orphan promises and loading screens. The third effect that I use is one that I've actually tried with vocals before and that I really loved. It's the Yellowcake Fried Gold. This is an excellent light overdrive for guitar and it sounds amazing on bass, but I use this primarily on vocals. It just has a sound that I think meshes really well with the sound of my voice, which is the only voice that I've ever had to record. I actually used it really prominently in one of my favorite parts that I've ever recorded, which is this one. In that case, the entire vocal was being run through the distortion effect in this box. And in this case, I'm going to be running the distortion in parallel through the effects sin, but I'm still sort of excited to hear what it sounds like.
Somebody wake me, 'cause I'm too deep in orphan promises and loading screens.
The fourth and final effect that I wanted to try is actually a combination of effects. The first is this harmonist in exactly the same settings that I was describing before, except I only ran the mono out instead of the stereo out. The mono out of this then went into this, the Fried Gold, using almost exactly the same settings, except that I darkened things even more by turning down the tone knob.
Somebody wake me, 'cause I'm too deep in orphan promises and loading screens.
I think each of those sounds is great in its own way, and in this particular moment, I haven't yet decided which of them is my favorite. I'm probably going to save that judgment for when I'm doing the editing of this video and when I listen back to that footage that you've just seen like 4,000 times. I have listened back, not 4,000, a bunch of times, and I still don't know exactly which of the options I'm going to choose. I know my least favorite was the delay sound, not because there's anything wrong with that pedal or delay on vocals in general. It's just not the sound that I'm actually imagining for this particular song. I also know that I didn't really care for the Fried Gold sound because on playback, like, it doesn't really seem to be doing that much. I'm sure if I increased the level of that in the parallel mix, it would be more noticeable, but I'm sort of taking it off the table. My favorite two options are the harmonist by itself and the harmonist combined with the Fried Gold. I think that actually the latter is the one that I like the most in this set of examples, but I really like the stereo spread that's created, obviously, using the stereo outs of the harmonist in the first example. And so what I'm going to do before making a final decision and actually performing this external bounce once again is test and like play around with the levels on that harmonist alone, like example 1 type scenario, to see if I can get something where the effect isn't quite as noticeable. But if I can't make that work, if it still sounds too chorusy to me, I'll probably just go with option 4, which I thought sounded amazing and really thicken the vocal, even though it's only in mono. But I'll make those decisions and then perform the eventual external bounce outside of the bounds of this video. My point in making this was to give you examples of what these effects sounded like on vocals and let you decide which ones you thought actually enhanced, thickened the vocal in the way that I was imagining. Let me know if one or the other of those effects sounded the best to you. Let me know if there are other effects that you use in your production chain to create a similar effect. As always, I really appreciate your time. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around.